everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the Why Marketing Podcast. My guest today is Jennifer Severance, the Chief Experience Officer at the American Marketing Association. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Hey, absolutely. I'm glad we were able to do this. So, your title there at the American Marketing Association is Chief Experience Officer. Can you explain your role there and everything that you're responsible for?
Sure. So as Chief Experience Officer, I oversee marketing, insight, innovation, customer service, design, and also community experience.
God, I hate your hands full.
Yes. Yes. We're in all sorts of things. Yes. Especially being the marketing team of the American Marketing Association. So everybody expects that the AMA is full of marketers at the Global Support Center, which is, we have a marketing team, but we're not all marketers here. So.
It's going to be a high pressure job having to market to marketers.
Yes. Yes.
So how long have you been over there at AMA?
Since January 2017.
Do you always think, okay, this is kind of the path I'm going to go down?
So I started off in design. My degree's from University of Tennessee in design. And I always loved and knew that I would do design. I think, at the time, it's funny because, I couldn't have said, oh, yeah, I'm going to be a chief experience officer, when I grow up, or even web design wasn't really, it was just starting at that time. So even digital wasn't what it was. I mean, we were, using SyQuest drives and, I think it was CD-ROM interactive was the extent of interactive design at that time. So there was a part of it at the core that's about just designing solutions and really thinking about the customer and the user. So I think really it has been at its core the same throughout, even, going back to the beginning days of college, when I first started studying graphic design and thought about fonts and communication arts and all the things that we were doing at that time. So I think, and I still to this day consider myself an experienced designer at the core and think about things in terms of design and the journey mapping and thinking about what people, all the emotions that are brought into it and everything that we're trying to get out of it. So yeah, I think it's, kind of been that constant thread throughout my career is the design at the core.
So after you got out of the University of Tennessee, what was your first job out of college?
So I got really lucky. I feel like I got really lucky. I was in Knoxville, Tennessee, of all places. So, you don't think, I guess there's HGTV, which is in Knoxville, Tennessee. So there's a lot. I don't want to say anything against Knoxville. I love Knoxville. I love Tennessee. But in terms of, the hotbed of design, it wasn't necessarily the place at the time, although a lot of my colleagues have gone on to be some of the brightest in the industry. I got a job that extended from an internship at a very small film production company. So I was doing video editing and motion graphics and broadcast design and even some interesting CD-ROM design at a very small place called Atmosphere Pictures. And my boss was one of the most inspiring people. And I look back now, it was a defining moment in my career working for him. It both spoiled me because he was somebody who followed his dreams and passion. And, I thought that's what everybody does when they go out into the world. We're all doing that. And then, kind of had spoiled me. So I kind of had a smack into reality when I took on other jobs. But yeah, so we were doing things for A&E and a lot of our work for TVA, defining brand standards, doing, massive, interactive kits for TVA, for Levi's, some major stuff, History Channel, a lot of branding, a lot of entertainment type of work. And that's kind of how my career went for a while, a lot of broadcast design stuff. Always did digital and always kind of had one hand in digital, was fascinated by digital. In the late 90s, fast forward to the late 90s, I was still doing entertainment, but I was doing more digital aspects of that. And I saw IDEO, there was like a Nightline special presentation on IDEO, which was at the time, they were a design. Now they're still a design company, but they were designing literal products. So it didn't feel like it was relevant to me in that sense. So I didn't feel like I could just get a job at IDEO. But when I saw that, I was like, that's what I want to be doing. That process, digging into, they were designing a shopping cart. So digging into like going to the grocery store and seeing how people are behaving with groceries. And I fell in love with it so much that I sent off for the VHS tape. I think it was like $60 at the time, which was a lot of money to drop back in for a VHS tape. And that's the only time I've ever done that. But that was also such a strange thing to be a defining characteristic in my career. But that was another huge part of that. And I think fast forward to today, and we're all really doing that in this industry. We're looking across the board, customer focus, really thinking about the journey, digging into research and using data and being iterative in terms of building prototypes and, putting together a minimum viable product and seeing how people behave with that. So yeah, that's kind of what drove my passion throughout my career, was that great love of design and the process.
It's neat. So basically the core has always been from the design standpoint, and from a marketer, I mean, really when you think of marketing, I mean, you're designing how customers are going to interface or view certain products and the engagement process. So probably serves you well there at the AMA.
Sure. I mean, our team, the experience team, is about designing the experience for the customer of the association, but then also, Russ Klein, who's the CEO of the American Marketing Association, actually has an experience design course where he talks about that. So it's, both. It gets kind of meta sometimes, designing the experience for marketers and for a marketing association, which is great, and presents challenges and also huge benefits at the same time.
So when we spoke last, there was some changes taking place over there at the AMA, and so could we kind of dive maybe a little into that?
Sure. Like any industry or any area, the association world and the marketing world is in the process of going through a lot of disruption, a lot of changes due to digital tools, due to accessibility that didn't exist before. So, when we think about the past, associations provided things like easy ways to network, finding jobs, which we can now do for free online with all sorts of different ways to self-service with that. So as a result, 5 years ago, Russ was brought on board to transform the AMA. And part of that transformation is a roadmap that we put in place a couple years ago. When I got here, we started building about a 3-year roadmap toward the transformation of the business model of the AMA. I mean, we call it the membership model, but it's really the entire business and thinking about how we can deliver to the individual marketer the best value. And it starts really with getting a really transparent view into an ongoing feedback loop with the customer, be that a member, be that somebody going to a conference, somebody attending a chapter. And it's a complicated roadmap because we do have, like I said before, there's a lot of, and this is my first time working in an association too, so it's new to me having, multiple chapters. We have 74 professional chapters, over 350 collegiate chapters, our entire academic community. So all of these people who are well-versed in marketing, customer experience, designing a new experience, a model for that, even in redoing our branding a few years back before I got here, a large majority of that was stakeholder management and co-creating that process with the community. And trying to, it's a lot of a challenge is, how do you utilize that community of experts? So we have people who are top of their field, right? How do you utilize them without it becoming too cumbersome of a management process? Because yes, we can get volunteers, but it takes a lot of time to figure out when and where and how we utilize those people without either wearing them out or wearing ourselves out in the process. But overall, so we're headed down this roadmap toward a new member model that actually provides better value. In the meantime, we cannot destroy our current state. So we kind of have to keep the train moving while we're building the tracks ahead of it and figuring out what that is. So that becomes kind of almost a dual role for especially the experience team, but all of the teams really at the support center is figuring out, how do we manage that? How do we shift that? And more recently, we've just released new technology platforms across the board. So a huge part of that roadmap, really the start of that roadmap, was in this technology release. Before we were working off of, not to get too technical, but we were working on Personify and SharePoint as a CMS and or CRM and CMS respectively. We've moved over to Salesforce and WordPress VIP. And what that means is not simply a shift or a refresh in what our website looks like. It's a total new way of working. And in that process, we were working on a technology system that was put in place in 1999. And even though there were changes made since then, the structure and the enabling characteristics of that still was the same. So a lot of those shifts right now, we're learning how to deal with that. We're learning how to change how we work in the process. We're learning how to even coach our communities and how to, all of these people who are volunteers at the chapter level are having to rethink how they work with the support center and the data at the support center. But now we actually can see what's going on. So before it was almost a black box, serious black box as to why something was happening or what was even happening. We didn't necessarily have a good view of the customer. Now we have a much better grasp of that, a view. And it is almost like, I know this is a very trite expression, but drinking out of the fire hose, it's like suddenly we have all of this capability, making sure we're maintaining focus on what's really important and also helping manage the stakeholders to maintain that focus as well, that there are certain pieces of the process that are important to remain intact as we move into the future, and some pieces of that we're questioning and seeing, is that really necessary? It's kind of a long explanation of what's going on, but
no, it's perfect, because when you really think about it, you've got, with the whole kind of modernization of not only your platform but the way you brought your role in, correct? I mean, you've got this entire team. You're working with marketers that ultimately probably take it pretty personal what they, how they can actually incorporate and utilize the AMA, because it's their association. How has that been working with those end users, the marketers, through this process, their adoption rate to be able to say, hey, this is why we're making these changes. This is the value and benefit. Have they been pretty receptive?
Yes and no. Yes, they've been receptive in terms of, they have to go through similar things in their day-to-day jobs, their, real jobs, not their volunteer jobs, but their real jobs. So I think in some ways it's almost validating to see the team that's supporting them go through and struggle through with us. There are a lot of volunteers that are ready to dig in and help. How can I help? Because it's what's exciting about being a volunteer, and what I'm seeing that's exciting about being a volunteer at the AMA especially, is that it's almost like, in some ways, leadership practice for some people. You actually get to go in, and especially at this time when we're going through so many changes and transformation, like being a part of, if you're the president of a chapter, if you're, incoming president of a chapter, especially now, communicating to your membership what's going on and doing these tests and really looking at it from a scientific perspective on what's working and what's not working in your chapter, being able to be part of that feedback, being able to be part of how we're actually building this, what we're changing, what are the, what new lines of business are we trying to incorporate, what are we piloting, what assumptions are we testing and validating, whereas before we couldn't do a lot of this stuff because we literally could not see what the results and data were from a lot of this. So now that we have those tools, and this is also very new. I mean, it was February that we launched these systems. So, a lot of this is we're uncovering it as we go. And I think there's a lot of, rebounding from the initial immediate release, the day from the launch, the day we launched, all of this stuff happened at once, and, we're rebounding from that and trying to find our equilibrium and balance, like trying to get back to that stability or some stability so that we can actually start to build on that and move forward, which we're starting to get to that point now. But there are there's still a lot of bugs, a lot of critical bugs in the system of, based on, we had to build these processes not knowing exactly how they worked. So there were a lot of assumptions built into it, and we're uncovering areas that were critical that we didn't think about. There were parts of even our bylaws that we kind of maybe didn't enforce so well, or were kind of lax about it. And so as a result, it didn't necessarily come in through business requirements. So we're starting to see things like that we're even designing around. But, like some of these they're not bugs necessarily, but rather flaws in the initial design that we're having to rethink and rebuild live, which is what we expected.
I would imagine it is a massive undertaking. And you had alluded to, the kind of that continuous customer feedback loop and why it's so important to make sure that that is a big part of that process that your team is engaged with. How has your team been able now to say, okay, we're getting all this great information because the data is showing this is what our members are asking for. This is what the market is doing. How do you deploy against that?
So I'll give some examples. Our registration process for becoming a member, for registering for an event, any of that. When we built the original design, the business solution behind it, we actually had to simplify our membership because at the time it was, especially our professional chapter membership, there was a base fee for global AMA membership, but then each chapter had different fees associated with them. So it became really complex, not only for the user, but also for building a piece of technology that can accommodate all of those variables and know where somebody is, know that if they live here, then this is their, and then there's add-ons, there's publications and magazines. So we actually had to simplify it going into it to be a flat rate of $300 a year annual membership, whereas some chapters that might have had their membership harmed by that because they're seeing less, and some that had more. So in that process, we did simplify the registration process. It's still complicated though. So you still go through it. It's still very complicated to try to communicate to a user who's going through all of these different options as you go. So it really could use, which is why we're rethinking the member model, could use a lot of, we talk about unbundling. Unbundling, it's not, no longer in the future is it a one size fits all where all of these go into this $300 a year membership if you're a professional, but there's different aspects of it. But when you do that, you can't just say, okay, we're going to launch and it's going to completely be unbundled. Could completely destroy the entire association if you do it that way, because we don't know which pieces of it are valuable and which aren't, and what's holding up which part of the process. It's like when you're renovating a house, you want to make sure that you don't mess up those structural beams that support the entire top floor, right? So that's kind of that's what a lot of the learnings are around, is around that complicated, there's the complications to that. And we found too, that our users are pretty resilient in terms of they bang around, they'll figure it out. There are a lot of people, I'm sure, that are abandoning it and saying this isn't worth it. But one of the things that we definitely learned is when you open up transparency like we have, so now we're opening up this feedback loop that we didn't have before, and we're hearing a lot of information. So we didn't account for the amount of customer service that we need. So our customer service went from really struggling to having to hire a whole bunch more of temp staff and then train that temp staff really quickly to be able to accommodate all of the information that's coming in. So we probably had the opportunity to hear those before, but it's kind of like we were blissfully unaware that people had certain thoughts about, our products. And now we're hearing all of this. So again, it's like the fire hose, right? All this information's coming in. We're right now trying to adjust and figure out what's actually important out of this information, and what of it's actually problems, and because we have bugs, what of it is actually talking about our core business, and what of it is going to continue, even the customer service. Like, what does that team look like moving forward? We know we need to build it up, but how much do you build it up? So these are all, most of our learnings are coming from the support staff and process and working with communities, and how do we adjust and change that?
It's interesting when you think about that, because in so many businesses, those challenges exist. They're like real world challenges, right? Where, until you are actually engaged into wanting to really understand what your customers are saying, you're pretty happy. And then you're like, oh, wow, I didn't realize I had that problem or that.
Yeah.
But I think it's probably also very refreshing too, from your seat, to be able to say, okay, look, we want to provide the absolute best experience we can for our members, because that's the lifeblood of your business, of the association, is its members. And the AMA is going through this transformation, looking out 12, 24 months. What are the great things that the AMA is going to be bringing to its members and to the marketing community?
And if we do our jobs right and get there, I think we're really trying to infuse that sense of community. There's something that happened a couple months into the job. I went to our professional chapters council meeting, and these are the people that deal with the 74 professional chapters, and they kind of manage all of those leaders. And they went around, they have this thing where they go around the room and they check in. And it was like this support group, people are talking about their lives, spouses getting sick, and even in some cases, unfortunately, passing away, people dealing with new jobs, with moves, with, storms destroying their house, and, all of these things that remind you these are whole people. And they're marketers too, but they're whole people, and they're if we're there to support the individual marketer, it's the whole marketer, and thinking about their entire lives, that it's not just about finding the next job, or, all of these things kind of move around. But in that meeting, I was crying, I was laughing, and I came out of it thinking, wow, I mean, the chapters get a fraction of that, I think. If we could bottle that, and I think that's what a lot of people try to do when they try to build communities, if we could genuinely ignite that, because it exists within the AMA, that feeling. And I think that's really what differentiates the AMA from any other network. We've talked about LinkedIn and finding jobs and, meeting up with people and connecting with people. It's that in-person whole marketer, kind of we follow you throughout your career feeling. I think if in 12 to 24 months, if we've hit at that, like that, if we can extend that through our communities, and not just through the chapters, but through the people who are engaging even just on a digital, or even going to some of the events or conferences, be they a local chapter one, or be they a national event, then really we have cemented our existence, our reason for existing. I think that's what would be true success for the AMA.
I like that. I mean, I think everybody wants to build a good, strong community. How have y'all been able to kind of adapt your program to say, okay, this is what our members are asking for? Is there one thing you've been like, wow, we didn't see that coming. We didn't realize they were wanting this service or this type of education?
I think there's, in a few pockets. I think we're still too early to be able to get those types of valuable insights. But even before, our higher ed conference, for example, does really well. And an example, our boot camps. We started doing these boot camps thinking they'd just be little small training series type of event. And they're huge, right? People love them. They can't get enough of them. So I just went to one recently, a couple weeks ago in Nashville, and you could actually see where the value, right? And speaking of community, it's something that we tried a different format. Whereas before, everybody kind of learned together, and you go in one room and you see these. So we divided out into 4 different tracks, and then 4 different groups that spent the entire, both days going through these together. And you could see people getting value, not just out of what they were learning, but connecting with each other. They're saving seats for each other at lunch, and they're, asking about like problems that they actually had. So you can see even in the breakouts it becoming more valuable, because we started experimenting with the format of how people would have these more shared experiences together in smaller groups, rather than one broad, push the message out. It was more like letting people sort of almost connect with, and I think we can do more of that as well. But that's one of the huge learnings that we're having. I mean, they're just they're incremental learnings that build up to something that's a big insight. I'm sure we'll have a lot more of those. That's just an area that even before our digital platforms launch, we were starting to understand and be able to respond to.
I've been to your national conference, and I got a lot out of it. So it's great to see that there's even more things that are going to be evolving from this new platform that's going to allow y'all to really kind of respond and make changes and be more nimble to build a stronger sense of that community. Going back now to you, as we start to kind of heading towards the end of the show, I like reflection. I always talk about it. If you could go back into time when you graduated from not the original UT, but University of Tennessee, what's the one piece of advice you'd give yourself?
I would tell myself to listen, not just with your ears, but observing. As you mentioned, I've been lucky to be exposed to a lot of great leaders and influencers through my career. And when I did shut up and listen and pay attention to them, that is the one thing I learned, that empathy is one of the most powerful tools that you can go into a job having. And it's not even just a job, but also just interacting with people. When I talk about the feedback loop, I think it's the same thing in a one-to-one situation. It's the same thing in a conference room when you're presenting to a group of people. It's being able to read people and really truly listen and stop trying to push your own agenda and start really listening to, okay, what is it that these people are going to get out of it? Or what is it that this person is going to get out of this, even just this conversation? What is this person trying to tell me? Maybe not with their words, but with their behaviors and actions and even body language. So I would say empathy. I probably wouldn't know what that meant when I was in college and wouldn't appreciate that. But yeah, I would say it's empathy.
So true. I mean, one of my professional mentors, when I was coming up, the one advice he gave me that I still remember to this day was, he goes, Pepper, just stop talking. Just shut everything else off around you. Just listen. They're the only people in the world at that moment. And while you're there, nothing else matters. And that's how you're going to be successful. And I think it's very true because people want to know that you're engaged and that you care. So I like that. I think that's a great reflection point.
Yeah, I would say I still very much struggle with that as well, because when I get really excited or passionate about something, I want to, express myself just like the other person probably wants to express themselves too. So it's just a good, reminder. I should probably carry around a plaque or something to put in front of me at all times. Yes.
I would imagine being the chief experience officer at the AMA does give you some exposure to some very talented marketers, leading marketers out there, people that are very influential. How is that though, to engage and have to sit there and try to be meeting or exceeding those type of expectations all the time?
You mean meeting and exceeding marketer expectations?
Yeah. Don't you feel like you're kind of always being judged a little bit? Like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
this level because so-and-so and this person, they're going to be there and I know they're going to look at this and go, it's not top notch. I would think that would be, as a competitive person, I would be always on edge. I'd be like, ugh.
Yeah, there's a quote that Russ keeps throwing out, which I think is perfect. I think it was a LinkedIn co-founder said something about, if you're not embarrassed by your first release, then you release too late. And I would say that's the case. So I think in addition to having empathy, it's not taking things personally, because a lot of it really is like, if I sat back, most of what I'm hearing now, I agree with them, right? If I were sitting in their seat, in their perspective, I talked to someone from the community recently that's an incoming president of a chapter, and he said, why would you even design it this way? And I said, you know what? You're right. I would say the same thing if I were you. Who in their right mind would design it this way? There's a lot going into something, that there's a lot happening in the background that people may not grasp or have all the information about. So it's a little easier for me to not take it personally because I do know all of those things. But it's also pretty amazing to be able to talk to these, for free, right? There are people who are like, I'll come in, the experts in the field that are willing to come in and teach us about this stuff. I've learned so much about marketing in the past 2 years than probably ever in my life. Just not only listening to these people in the community, but also sitting in on conferences and trying to figure out. So it's great, right? I get an education in addition to doing my job.
I'm with you there. That's why I did a marketing podcast. I get to talk to great leaders like yourself all the time. And I'm constantly like learning, I always feel like the idiot on the other side of the mic, like,
Right. Yeah, I feel the same way. There's a lot of stuff. I mean, I grew up through the design side. There's a lot about marketing. I don't have an MBA, I didn't know a lot of this stuff in the past. And certainly the academics, the entire academic community is just amazing sitting in, like, half that stuff is over my head. But just seeing the passion and really the openness and acceptance too of people to explain it and trying to understand, consumer behavior and think, it's so in some ways I feel like a complete novice and idiot regarding some of this stuff. I also know that that's how you learn, that if I get to a place where I'm sitting in a room and I feel like I know more than everybody, there's something wrong with that. And I probably am not enjoying my job if that's the case.
I would think you'd always want to be the least known as far as what you're doing, because you're really surrounding yourself with the right leaders. So
yes.
I appreciate you taking time to share with us not only your backstory, but what's going on over there at the AMA. It sounds like there's a lot of very exciting stuff, and I'm happy to hear that y'all are transforming the entire association, and I wish nothing but the best with that going forward.
Thank you. And it was my pleasure. I enjoyed it.
Anyways, well, thanks again for being on the show, and bye-bye.